Just before you came on, we had news from Microsoft that they actually got those temporary licenses to sell to Huawei. Tell us about this dependence of China on U.S. technology, because it seems that the blacklisting, that the entity list is actually pushing back on that.
Yes.
Is this the right strategy for Washington?
The entities list and the sort of piece by piecemeal approach of letting out technology, I think it's a mistake. We have a very interdependent relationship across the board where they're talking trade, investment, finance, and tech. And that interdependence is good for American business, it's actually also good for American national security. And so the steps that we've taken recently by putting Huawei on the entities list, I think has made the Chinese feel that they can't depend on American suppliers, and so they've doubled down and tripled down on indigenous innovation. Of course, there's some things that they must depend on. There's certain types of chips, certain types of software services, and that's why certainly the things that Microsoft supplies is critical to them, and it didn't endanger American national security. So I think that sort of rational reason why they were given the license.
You wrote an op-ed with one of our other favourite China people, Jude Blanchett, about this destructive decoupling between the US and China, right? Is it possible to undo that? Because, even though we keep saying you can't undo globalization, we are seeing this bifurcation, be it whether it comes to industrial policy or technology. How destructive is it to go their separate ways, and is it unavoidable?
Oh my God, it is so radical an idea to decouple. I mean, the crazy idea of hardline used to be deterrence and anti-dumping and countervailing duties, and then it became, the hardline was like, let's put on some sanctions, right? And now we're talking, let's rip these two economies apart. That's based on a very simple mathematical formula. Greater engagement equals less security. And that's actually not true. You can have greater engagement and protect your national security if you have the right type of mechanisms in place to manage the risk. Some places, some things you can't sell and provide China, and that's why we've proposed this idea of managed interdependence, that it's not just a free-for-all, that you have to be careful, but ripping the two economies apart, putting a big line down the middle of the Pacific, that's nuts.
Not only nuts, but can it even be done? It's not like the governments control this process.
Yeah. No, I think you're exactly right. That well, first of all, I think it's important to say that the discussion over the last 6 months about decoupling, we've seen very little decoupling. If you look at the level of trade, finance, etc., even in tech, there's been some, but it's still mostly modifications of supply chains. But yeah, if you try to fully disengage and pull apart, you don't know exactly what business is going to do and whether the U.S. is going to be isolated or China.
You're based in D.C., right?
Yes.
Are you surprised at the level of threat that people in Washington feel about the growth of China? Why did we have this change in mindset?
Yeah, I think it's a few things. One is the U.S. generally is worried about globalization and the effect on our economy, and President Trump's political base is rooted in that anxiety. And then you've just got very successful China and an idea, and there have been a whole series of reports about how China is successful across the board in so many different technologies and is looking at the U.S. in their rearview mirror. And then you've got issues of values, the NBA Hong Kong, et cetera, that's come up. So it looks like an existential threat to the U.S., and therefore people are on freak-out mode. And so we've leapt before we've looked in some policies, and so we're struggling. Eventually we'll figure out what we're going to do long term. And so I think that's where we are right now.
Is the rise of AI, of greater investment in connectivity in China, a real threat to Western countries like the US? And I suppose part two of that question is, does that change if we have a change in government? Because it feels like a bipartisan, I don't want to say paranoia, but insecurity maybe.
Sure.
Freak out, like Scott just put it.
Yeah. Well, certainly there's some ways in which China could use AI or quantum or blockchain or some of these other technologies that could be dangerous for the United States and the Western Alliance and others. You think about the way the social credit system could be applied, or how technology might be used in Xinjiang or abroad, and that's really concerning. Is it an immediate existential threat? I don't think so. But it is a challenge, and we have to figure out how to manage it. And there's some types of technologies that have been part of export controls that we need to continue. We might need to expand those, some types of investment restrictions. But we don't need to go from full openness to full closure and autarky. That's really going way too far. And so this is what the United States is trying to figure out what that correct balance should be.
What happens once President Trump signs the Hong Kong Human Rights and Democracy Act?
I think actually not a whole lot. Certainly the Chinese are very upset about this, but when you've got all but one member of Congress voting for this, the president's not in a position to veto it. He might, after 10 days, just let it go into force. I think the Chinese will be upset, but I think everyone needs to remember that the Hong Kong issue is a domestic Chinese problem. It's about one country, two systems. It's not about the United States or UK. And the resolution of Hong Kong isn't going to be debated between Washington and Beijing or London. It's going to be debated in Hong Kong. And so I think we all hope that it's resolved in a way that allows Hong Kong to continue to thrive.